stay in New York already. But
Good.
last night was extraordinary.
Are you going to?
Issue, and that is, it's going to involve, speaking of your mother, it's going to involve your family.
Right.
Um, you don't look very Chinese. It means that you arrived on the scene in Taiwan for probably parental reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to talk about that, why you ended up in Taiwan and at the school.
Okay.
And your first, start with that.
Right.
Take it from there.
Okay. As I mentioned, I was on island from June of '67 to June of '69, so 2 full years. My father had been working for a number of years with the Treasury Department, U.S. Treasury Department, and in customs. So he was a customs expert, principally dealing with textiles, imports of textiles and that sort of thing into the U.S. But he went on loan for about 3.5 years, loaned from Treasury to State Department, taking a couple of posts with USAID. So he was part of that big wave of U.S. advisors to South Vietnam affiliated with the United States Agency for International Development, AID. And I think that those 2 years that I was in Taiwan were a peak of AID involvement in South Vietnam. So they sent him to Saigon in February of 1967. We stayed back home in California, finished out the school year, sold the house, and came over in June of '67. We had been toying with the idea of being in Manila or Bangkok or one of the other satellite cities, but decided kind of at the last minute to go to Taipei. And so we ended up there in June of '67. So we were there primarily because my father was a USAID advisor to South Vietnam Customs Department.
So you came back and forth to visit, or?
On average, once every 4 to 6 weeks, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Was that a fairly common setup for military and state people?
Not for military. That was the common setup for AID people. In fact, most of the AID people were living in this large neighborhood up in Wellington Heights, what they call Wellington Heights, on the hillside above Beito, which is kind of way out to the northwest. And most of the AID people up there had fathers who were in Vietnam, not just Saigon, but throughout Vietnam. And each of them would come back home every 4 to 6 weeks, maybe. The military situation, I can't speak for because of direct involvement, but my impression was that there were, I think the military kids that I knew, their parents were on island as advisors or whatever in Taiwan, as opposed to being connected with, directly connected with Vietnam. There may have been a few whose fathers were in Vietnam, but most of them, I think, were there in advisory roles to the Taiwan military.
Well, you came from California, what, San Francisco High School?
Yeah, East Bay.
East Bay.
Yeah.
What was the first impression when you landed in this in Taiwan?
Oh my. 15 years old. Probably the first impression was the blast of heat and smells getting off the airplane. I think that's everybody's first impression. Radically different sensations. The senses just had to turn 180 degrees to get the full impact. Let's see, the next impressions would have been, we were shuttled by bus from the airport up to Wellington Heights directly. And so we got to see the entire route through Taipei, up past T.A.S., off into the rice paddies, and then sharp right turn and up into the hills to Wellington. So we got to see what would be our main haunts for the next 2 years, all in that first bus trip. And we were among the first families up on the very top of Wellington Heights. We were joined over the next 4 to 6 weeks by other AID families at the very top of Wellington, which was almost exclusively AID families. And we lived on Chungyang 6th Road. I think there was a total of 9 roads in Wellington at the time. Actually, 7th and 9th roads hadn't been completed by that time. We moved into 6th Road, which was the topmost spot in Wellington Heights. And we had the second to the last house way up on the top. It couldn't get much higher. So those were the initial impressions.
Was that a good place to live as far as logistics and comfort and so on, or was the humidity kind of overwhelming?
No, in terms of comfort, it was terrific. We were up high enough so that we didn't have quite the oppressive heat that people would have, especially down in the center of the city, or even down in Tianmu and places like that. We were up high enough to get some good wind and some fresh air, but we were much more isolated from activities and places and things than a lot of other people were, because we were way up on this dead-end area up in the hills, far removed from local transportation. We had to have our own shuttle bus that kept a regular schedule of, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 trips a day at peak times. And so we kind of, we stayed fairly close as a neighborhood, as a community, and got to be, good friends with the kids right around those few streets where we lived. And it wasn't until school started that we were introduced to kids, started hanging out with other kids from other areas, like in town or in Tianmu or up on Grass Mountain. So for the first summer and for much of the time, much of that 2 years, it took a major effort to go someplace. We had to make a trip out of it. You wait for the shuttle bus, or you get in the car and travel a half an hour or so to get downtown. So it was a big Megillah to go someplace. So in that respect, we were a little bit isolated, but it was the hill was full of brand new homes. We moved into a brand new little home, and most of the AID people did as well. Very comfortable,
Was it stone or wood? I can't recall.
There was some stone, very little wood, mostly plaster, so that being up so high and being exposed, 360 degrees of exposure, whenever even a major windstorm would come up, but especially when typhoons would come up, we would be blasted, the sides of the homes would be blasted with water, and within 20 minutes, the water had seeped through those walls and was sweating down all the plaster walls. And of course, coming through in bucketfuls through the windows that weren't very well sealed. So no, not a heck of a lot of good rock or stone work. Fairly cheap places, but really, nice looking, comfortable. They look kind of hacienda-like, with white plastered walls and red tile and all that sort of thing.
What do you remember about the campus?
My first impressions were, had a very large population, comparable to a stateside high school. Those years, I think, were the peak population, the late 60s years. So there were kids everywhere, scads of kids in high school, junior high, and elementary. It was a large campus. We could go and get lost out along the dike area that surrounded the playing fields. We could find areas of tall grass and go and sneak away and hide. So the campus was really large and very pretty in my memory. The buildings tended to be kind of stark. Spartan classrooms. We had the main classroom building was a 2-floor curved building that, like I say, was mostly classrooms, mostly fairly stark rooms. In the area enclosed within that curved building area was a large open lot that we eventually turned into Senior Island, which apparently they had a senior island in the earlier campus, and so they thought it was, you know, good tradition to hold with. So they dug Senior Island, made Senior Island during those 2 years that I was there.
Did you get involved in that?
Not really. Mostly I was a sophomore and junior those 2 years, so never legitimately could be on island, and didn't get involved in the digging or the other projects. Mostly we would organize raids, you know, on the days that we felt brave and had sufficient numbers that we wouldn't get beaten up. But no, I wasn't much involved with the activities of building Senior Island. They built a brand new library building while I was there that was right kitty corner to Senior Island. And that was actually quite a comfortable building with carpeting and the whole works, brand new. What else?
Was the roundhouse there at that time?
Yeah, the one with the zigzag roof? Yeah, that was there. That was on the outside of the main enclosed campus area, enclosed by that curved building on 2 sides, the new library building, the big cafeteria, and then there was, just in front of the cafeteria, there was kind of an open quad area with a little snack bar. What the heck was that building just on the other side of that? I can't remember. But the roundhouse was beyond that little complex, that compound.
What was that used for? It seems people keep talking about the roundhouse. I'm just kind of curious.
Those were administrative offices. I think that's where Superintendent Wire, I think, had his office. I can't remember if our principal was in the roundhouse or if he was in the front office in the top part of that curved classroom building. There were offices in the first part of that building as well. But yeah, the roundhouse was, as far as I can recall, it was administrative offices. And that was set at the top of the big circular driveway. There were 2 gates leading out onto the main road. Buses would come in the far gate and come and circle around the roundhouse and park and disgorge students. And then they would park diagonally in the large parking area towards the second gate, towards the exit gate. So that was where the roundhouse was. Trying to mentally reconstruct the campus. The wall area, there was of course, a large cement wall that surrounded almost the entire campus, if not the whole campus. And the area in between the entrance and exit gates was the area in, when was it? Early part of 1969, where we had a huge typhoon and it broke down. The water had built up outside campus and broke down that huge cement retaining wall and came flooding in right in between, I think it was in between those 2 gates, flooded across the field near that roundhouse and came in and submerged the lower level classrooms and book lockers and everything else. That was early '69, I think. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling here.
That's all right. Did you get involved in the cleanup on that typhoon?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, a little bit, for a couple of days. We were stranded for a while up on Wellington. Let's see, I think I had a friend spending the night that happened, and we couldn't get out of there for a day or so. and then finally were able to come down, and we did some cleanup, mostly hosing off books and laying them out in the sun to dry for a half a day. Yeah.
Well, I want to hear about lots of things. One thing I'd like to be interested in knowing about is, again, you talk about a lot of military and AID students. What was the mix of people that you kind of hung out with?
I hung out with a fair mix of kids, both AID and military, and some kids who were there either with missionary parents or business parents. Although the last two categories were smaller in number than military kids and AID kids. I think military kids were in the majority during those 2 years, followed by State Department of some stripe or another, mostly AID. And then those accounted for the majority of American kids, but T.A.S. during those 2 years had an incredibly international student body, so that a lot of, say, the Japanese kids, Southeast Asian kids, Filipino kids, even a few European kids were there with parents who were in business, perhaps with diplomatic missions, I don't recall, and maybe some missionary parents as well. So really the predominance of military and State Department were among the American kids at school. And American kids did tend to constitute the majority of the student body. But there were still, looking through the yearbooks, there were, of course, lots of local Taiwanese and Taiwanese kids and kids of mainland parents, a lot of Southeast Asian kids, a lot of Japanese kids. I don't recall if there were Korean kids there at the time. And then just a smattering of kids from elsewhere, either Polynesia or Europe or West Asia.
How did the kind of social groupings, what patterns emerged given this real diversity?
The amazing thing about T.A.S. excuse me, during those 2 years was that, yeah, there were social groupings, some of them by ethnic group, some of them, according to who is most popular, who is most handsome and pretty and that sort of thing. But really, we were amazingly able to cross those lines with relative ease, much more ease than was my experience as a freshman in a stateside high school, and the experience of my siblings, both older and younger, who were in stateside high schools. I hung with local Taiwanese kids all the time. We played music together with a number of them. We had a guys club of sorts that was probably the most diverse group of guys that I've ever been involved with. And so we tended to be able to cross those lines, and they were really just thin dotted lines at TAS, but we were able to cross them with great ease. Whether we were doing homework, hanging out at military clubs, hanging out downtown, playing music, going to school events. We pretty much tended to erase those lines very easily.
What were the big hangouts? Types of things at those times?
Well, for the military kids and for a lot of AID kids, it would be military clubs. My family was kind of unique because my dad, in addition to being State Department AID, he was also retired military. And so we came to Taiwan equipped with both AID identification cards and military identification cards, and and when we traveled around Southeast Asia and around that larger area, we frequently took space available flights, military flights, stayed at military bases. So our family was kind of unique in that respect. But some of the big hangs were the Officers Club down in the far north part of Taipei, just as you cross the river from the Grand Hotel, down a couple of blocks from there, below the zoo.
It had a pool, right?
Yeah. In fact, I've got a lot of video footage of that open pool area at the Officers Club. And we would go and hang out at that pool or at the Grand Hotel swimming pool. Sometimes the NCO Club. There were also a lot of military kids who would hang out at places downtown that I rarely went to, so I'm not real familiar with them. But my big hangs for people in AID and my military friends, Officers Club, NCO Club, Grand Hotel, and then of course the two major teen clubs, the teen club in Tianmu, part of a big complex, military complex in the, let's see, where would that have been? Kind of the central eastern part of the town of Tianmu, just a few miles from school. It housed a teen club, some tennis courts, a small theater, snack bars. I can't remember what else. That's where, in fact, we had church meetings for most of that 2 years, was in the teen club. So we would come in Sunday morning, 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, after having had a rowdy teen club dance Saturday night, the night before, and I would drag myself in there for church meetings and clean up beer bottles. Well, we're not supposed to have had beer bottles there, but everybody did. So we'd clean up beer bottles and soda cans and waste paper and garbage and everything and have church meetings in the teen club. And then the Grass Mountain Yangmingshan Teen Club was another common hang as well, especially for the Grass Mountain military crowd.
You're talking about kind of boys' clubs. What has popped up with other people we used to talk with as girls, that kind of a sorority sort of groupings and so on. I can't quite get a tracking with this, what that's really meant, how formal or informal or sanctioned or unsanctioned or really made. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, in terms of sanctioned, you mean school sanctioned?
That part too, but I'm just curious, what the affiliation was. It was just kind of a, and also how you got in or out, or what difference it made.
Well, in I guess it was August of '67, just after I'd been there for a month or so, a couple of months, we had a dance down at T.A.S. that was supposed to kind of bring new kids together with old kids and do a bit of a mixer before school started a couple of weeks later. And that was my first introduction to some of the cliquishness, what there was of it at T.A.S., because I was introduced to kind of the two big social groups that continued for my 2 years there, fraternity and a sorority. The fraternity was not really a fraternity as we think of that. They were called the Dukes, and you know, the studliest guys, the well-dressed guys, the handsome ones, the popular ones were invited to, not really pledge, but invited to go through whatever rigmarole they went through to become a part of the Dukes. And they were really the royalty, the guy royalty at T.A.S. And their counterpart was more of a formal sorority. They called themselves Delta Alpha Gamma, or Gamma. And the Gamma girls were the equivalent of the Dukes. They were the popular girls, very well dressed, got their clothing all tailored, by tailors down in Taipei. And each of them wore little, wore little gamma pins. Their insignia was a delta, kind of three little symbols vertically aligned, a delta on top, an alpha second, and then a kind of a slightly bent and broken gamma at the bottom. And they would wear that little emblem on chains or pins or whatever. And they had to do the whole pledging bit. New pledges would have to come to school dressed, in football helmets and swimming fins and dresses on backwards and whatever. And who knows what other rituals they had to go through. But they were the two main groups, social groups, and they did tend to be kind of cliquish. But even so, a lot of them were very warm and very good kids and good friends of mine. But during the 2 years that I was there, a couple of other guy groups sprung up as reactions to the Dukes. The rest of us who were a little scruffier, couldn't get approached by them, to save our lives. And so we organized a couple of alternative groups. Ours we called the Cards. And like I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, we were a really diverse crowd of basically ruffians. We had kids from just about every imaginable ethnic background at school come together as kind of the scruffier version of the Dukes. And we were each assigned a card from the deck of 52, mostly the royalty. And so I was the king of clubs. We had the ace of spades, who was a black kid, who immediately grabbed it. He said, "I'm going to be the ace of spades." He was our head card. I'll have to look at my notes to remember his name. Walter Allen. And so everybody had, was called by one of the members of the card, the deck card royalty. And when I moved away in June of '69, then one of the other guys who was we didn't have any queens, okay? We didn't have queens. we had aces, kings, and jacks, all right? So one of the guys who was a jack moved up and took over my king of clubs position. It really was no hierarchy except a couple of the aces were clearly leaders. And then there were a bunch of kids, many of my friends, who I guess felt slighted by the Cards, and in response to that, and as a rejection, an ironic rejection of the Dukes, they called themselves the Ducks, and they got together kind of along the same lines as the Cards. They were a little bit scruffier, and more of them were underclassmen, more of them were freshmen and sophomores, while I was a junior at the time. And so the Dukes, the Cards, and the Ducks were kind of the hierarchy of guy groups. And as far as I recall, the Gamma, Delta Alpha Gamma sorority was the only social group of that type for girls.
What kind of things what kind of activities did your group do?
Well,
together and walk around.
Yeah, the Dukes, they would do, occasionally these philanthropic sort of things. The Cards would rumble. We thought of ourselves as being more switchblade types, and we actually rumbled with some local Chinese kids in the park up at the top of the police circle in Tianmu. When you go up that main drag with the teen club and the military compound on the right side, you keep on going. There's a circle at the top of the police station, and access to this park down the hill, quite a large park. And so we were there one night. Everybody, I guess, had been drinking, and I want to first hear a little sidebar here. I'm not a drinker, not an alcoholic drinker. In those days, I sacrificed my principles for a couple of years. Anyway,